Hello and welcome to the 2021 Styrian GP analysis for Lewis Hamilton. How did he perform in the race? What were his times and what happened with that gap to Verstappen? Watch the whole video to find out. So before we jump into the lap times, let's have a look. Bit of a summary. Started P2, ended P2, P2 the whole race. Quickest lap, as we saw, pit in there for one final lap at the end, and the sixth fastest through the pit lane. So good job from Mercedes, and he did indeed win the teammate battle. Jumping across to the positives, very secure second place, but unfortunately very secure second place. He was a fair way off the pace from Verstappen. Fastest lap of the race to earn that extra point, and also quite a significant gap back to Bottas and Perez. Negatives, he was about 15 seconds off the pace once you remove out that final pit stop. Perez is also getting closer and becoming more of a factor in the races. He's definitely giving that second wingman that Red Bull's always looked for, and still a significant qualifying gap up to Verstappen. Let's have a look at the strategy quickly. Very typical strategy for the first part of the race for those that started on the mediums. Only deviation is that stint on the soft tyres for 2 laps at the end to get the fastest lap. Alrighty, now that we've covered off the summary, let's jump into the lap time. So here we go, lap times for Lewis Hamilton, lapping very consistently those first 15 laps. And no significant tyre degradation. Came in for the pit stop, and you can immediately see the impact of that hard tyre. And you can see he really was starting to push relatively hard here on the hard tyre in those first 10 laps. And for a while, there was a bit of thought that maybe they were moving to a 2-stop strategy, which, well, they did, but only for the fastest lap. And you can see just the tyre degradation. Despite the decrease in fuel load, there was really no decrease in pace. In fact, it increased a little bit throughout the race there for Hamilton. And you can see their fastest lap of the race on the last lap. Before we look at the Verstappen battle, let's have a look at his gap back to Valtteri Bottas, and you can see Hamilton clearly ahead, well, the whole race ahead of Valtteri, and especially those first 15 laps, over a second a lap. He was gaining on Valtteri, and even then on the hard tyre, you can see the difference between Hamilton and Valtteri just continually building up that gap, and it almost reached 30 seconds before Hamilton's final pit stop. And let's move on there to the gap to Verstappen. This is not a chart that's pretty from a Mercedes perspective. So relatively good through the first 15 laps, but then relatively consistent, falling behind and beyond 5 seconds when that pit stop happened, which meant no stress from Red Bull from an undercut perspective. And you can see there he stuck with Verstappen relatively well, again for the first 10 laps. But then it looks like Lewis's tyres just started to degrade a bit. And especially those last 5 laps before the putting the softs on, you can see they pretty much just fell off a cliff there. And then as we saw, moving into the pit stop for the fastest lap of the race. So that is the summary for Lewis for the weekend. Not the best weekend, but it was a very secure second place. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe so I know that you want to see these videos, and I'll be back next week.